Hilarious. So, all right. So I think we're cool. We're up and running on YouTube. Is that correct? Yep. And you look wonderful. I don't
Well,
know
it's just
how
a
I look.
sign. Yeah, I don't know about that, but
Hilarious.
okay. I'll take it.
I haven't seen myself this morning, so I don't know how I look, but I try to avoid mirrors. There you are. So, all right. Well, here we are with Sharon, and Sharon is reading to us from Ken Wapnick on parents and children. And so far, that's been a really wonderful read for us. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Sharon. This mic is all yours.
Okay. Good morning. So I just had Spirit just turn to a page in these two books. These parents and children are most difficult classroom. I didn't follow order, which is very common for me. I pretty much have seen now that in my life, I've really been successful by intuition. I always felt like, how am I going to hear the Holy Spirit? But what I've learned is, I'm going for a test, a neurological assessment, because my brain, it's not just, I talk about this, but my brain is not hooked up to my ears. So the sound, and this is, I think, either from my birth or whatever it is. So what I'm seeing now is that trust has become like a bedrock for me, but it happened for this mind automatically. Now, when I mean trust, I'm not ashamed to talk about any of the stuff that I used to have. Like, I always tell people I have ADHD, but I really have also neurological impairment with the brain and the ears. So that's why people have a hard time sometimes following me. So we're working on that. And the spirit is just saying, listen, you don't need to worry about any disability because it's not who you are. But in order to join, I am using my brain to read. So here we go. Regis, are you have a snow day or you just have a prep period or you're not at work? Look how cute he is.
It's a snow day.
Oh, all right. We had one yesterday. Aren't they fun? I love snow days. All right. So here, Kenneth Wapnick, and I will probably go in and out. These two books I could do this whole year because I don't care if I repeat it because I'm only teaching myself. And as we all know, we only learn by repetition. So, Ken Wapnick was asked this question in part two, and this is all about the adult child. And it's about you as a parent, it's about anything that as adults. And because he is a psychologist, this process, he was called into this, and Dub is right, not by accident. He's definitely a scholar for sure. So a questioner asks him, I'm not psychologically sophisticated, so could you please explain how Bill called his ego problems into his relationships, such as with his father and how he related to other people or friends? So here's the answer. Freud's notion of the repetition compulsion is relevant here. The compulsion to repeat the same neurotic patterns over and over again. Now, this brings back a memory. I think it was like 2009 when Regina was reading a lot of her, I think it was the Anna Romana. Holy Spirit was guiding her. And every time she felt something, Holy Spirit would say, have you felt this before? Because the thought is irrelevant, but it's the emotions that I run from, right? And I have different ways of running from them. They're totally things that the ego mind has tucked away. So he's saying basically, when I have triggers, I'm being triggered by the past feeling, not the thought, but the feeling. And that feeling is coming up from my healing. So he's saying we have this compulsion to repeat the same neurotic patterns. Well, we're not doing that on purpose. That's really what's going on. Everybody that comes into your life is like the Wizard of Oz. You have somebody with courage, you have somebody with a brain, you have different people, seeming people, searching for peace and wanting God, but not really understanding why. Everybody has a different religion. Everybody has a different belief. So what he's saying, Freud was somebody I understood very young, even with my issues, because a gift that I have is psychology. I have a lot of knowledge, probably because I was a client for years and loved psychology. Anyway, so he's saying this can be applied to Bill's situation, which is an example of what we all do in one way or another. As a child and even as an adult, Bill suffered the pain of feeling unloved and rejected, if not overly abused, as in the incident of his father destroying his office. And, we all have different interpretations of abuse. Some people, if you even yell at them, they feel like they're being abused. But his father tore his office apart. Point is that this is not something that happened to Bill. He wanted it to happen. That was a hard one for me. Mainly because it's impersonal consciousness. So I always came back to the fact that if it's impersonal, then how does Sharon have a say? Well, Sharon doesn't, but the oneness does. And in oneness, we've made this dream up. So the point is that we all want this on a very unconscious level. But when you get into a space where people are advanced course students and they say that, even though there are projections, it gets confusing, because to actually say, I wanted this to happen is a hard thing for the ego, because the ego wants to blame. But obviously, we aren't even the ego, because the ego is just a script. Now, I want to point out that also the Holy Spirit is a script too, because it's already over. But anyway, I remember that with Regina, when Holy Spirit said to her, have you been here before? And that's something I always stuck with me. There's certain things that Spirit holds for us that sticks with us. So, he wanted to happen. And so it was something he did to himself. Bill was the one who rejected God's love. That's really the whole point here. We had one thought, we blew out a world, and the Big Bang happened. And we are living it through the process of awakening or peace or whatever you want to call it. And so he said, since he rejected God, for it was his parents who did so. In this way, he was innocent and miserable, but he was innocent. And that's truly what, at least for this mind, I always have done. Do you know what he did to me and she did to me? And that's truly the ego of just wanting to shame someone out there more than ourselves. And that's all day long, that, a seeming ego could be doing that and not realizing it. He denied that thought, projected responsibility for it, and made a script with parents who rejected him. This resulted in Bill no longer being the one who rejected love, for it was his parents who did so. In this way, he was innocent and miserable, but he was innocent. And we're all innocent, because the dream was made as an attack on God, and God didn't go anywhere. So we're always innocent. But every time I go back and I say, okay, I want it my way, I'm just not allowing myself to be in the thought system of Holy Spirit. Now, the truth is there's only silence, right? Only silence. All this worked very well for the ego, and so throughout the life, Bill chose to be involved with those who would abandon him, betray, and reject him. That's exactly it. Starting in the story of Sharon, my mom was 6 months pregnant with me, and she got polio, and that was a telltale sign of the story that was going to unfold, right? And it's always the fact that I'm being abandoned, because what better thing than to say I was left at the hospital The nurses had to take care of me. I never bonded with my mom, and yada, yada, yada. He's saying all this worked very well for the ego. So throughout his life, Bill chose to be involved with those kinds of people. I was abandoned, I was betrayed and rejected. When that happened, he would feel justified in concluding, you see, it happened again. I can't trust anyone. You can't, as an ego, you can never trust anyone because you always have somebody on the outside picture of doing something wrong to what the ego sets up for all of us. So if I do, they will surely reject me. I build a wall and not get close to people. And that would be something I can relate to. If I do, they will surely reject me, as did my parents and many others. And it is not my fault. I will ensure that this hurt does not happen again by never getting close to anyone. So this brings a story up 50 years ago when I went to art school. And had two best friends. And they were both wonderful friends. My friend was gay, the guy was gay, and my friend that was a girl, and still I'm friendly with her and him. She was a very big nurturer. And it was interesting because I never projected anything onto either one that I can remember because it was joyful. I was able to be with people that were not going to judge me. And these two never judged me. And I had this ability to laugh at myself, and we would all laugh at ourselves. And that's what worked in those days. But my friend that is the woman, I won't say names because who knows, but she's in a place now where she knows everything. So when we were younger, we didn't pass our portfolio review. And I was already married, and I was about 20, I think, not even, well, maybe I was 20, yeah. And it was kind of with this woman, I was very tenacious about it not being fair because my grades were B's and A's. So I went to the law school at Temple University, and the lawyer ended up in the school of law, taking the case for all of us because he saw what I was saying. But my friend now to this day says, do you remember I was the one who got everybody to pass the review? So what she's doing now, this friend of mine, is wanting to take credit for everything that happens to everyone. I didn't stop her because it's irrelevant. But there's things in her life today that she blames everyone and everything, that people use her, people don't like her. And I just listen. I have nothing to give her. The only thing I mention is, why don't you go on a dating site, or why don't you? And it's not. And then I realized she's perfect. She is the Son of God. So when she takes credit for something, she's just taking a thought that I did and making it about her. And I'm quite sure that that's just the way the ego in this mind, her name is Sue. The ego in Sue's mind is hurting today because she's gone through cancer. She's had she never got married. She wanted a baby, and it's always everybody else's fault. So I got to see how much it didn't trigger me when she was saying all these things, basically because I'm still seeing my own mind. So if I'm judging her, then I'm seeing something in me that would do that. So there's not a judgment, but there is almost like an exhaustion because every conversation I have with her, it's always about the things that she has done for people. And I looked for the trigger in me, and I thought, God, if this was all ego, I would have jumped at her and said, you didn't do that. I was the one who led everybody. And realizing that is absolutely irrelevant because it really never happened. It's happening in a dream where it's ephemeral. There's nothing, it just disappears. Hi, Lori. Anyway, so So, what I can look at today is the gratitude for the work that has come through me since I'm, 24 years old. I started therapy when I was actually 25. And the willingness to not want to suffer was the reason I went to therapy and stayed with that therapist for a very long, long time. So anyway, Ken is saying, and that's me too. Getting close to people is kind of scary because what are they going to find out about me? How bad I am, how guilty I am. And it was hard to even get to the place where I am because these, awakening is an escape from concepts, and these concepts block the light. And there were so many concepts. So it was kind of interesting how the promise that Jesus makes to us is true, but he doesn't say it's going to happen right away. He does say it's a process. So he says, Ken says, interesting, if people do not actually reject us, we would perceive them that way. We would still find something, right? Since everything occurs in the mind, whether or not the rejection happened in form is irrelevant. Therefore, it does not matter what reality is, for even if others are kind and loving, we will make up a tale of betrayal and rejection. Like even if they take your salt at the dinner table, or if they say, in a snarky voice, blaming me for something, of course I'm going to say, I don't like them. I just don't like them. They don't like me. I don't like them. And that is just the way we live in the ego. We need them to do this because this confirms that we are not responsible for what is happening to us. Well, since there's nobody out there, and since I'm looking at only my thoughts, if I would say, I can't believe she did that, always taking credit for everything when it was me, then I'm just in that ego story, and I'm just as wrong as maybe she would be. Not maybe, because her perception is her perception. And this is the thing about the ego. It will give you different ways to cope with living here. Doing a thing called parts therapy now, and I'll go into that next week because that would be another teaching, but it's all about the fact that the psychologist who invented parts therapy is Dick Schwartz. And he works a lot with this other therapist, Gabor Mate. And what he does is, as a therapist, he realizes his clients were always saying, like they were, let's say, take a binge eater that was binging. He would say, how come you're not stopping? And he would ask them, and he'd say, a part of me wants to stop, and a part of me doesn't. So it's kind of interesting because what Dick is saying, you're not people, but you have parts of beliefs in your consciousness. And then it helps you identify them as parts of you and not being afraid of them by giving them character, like loneliness, frightened child. You use all those different tools. It's just another way to skin a horse. And there's no difference in this than just having the Holy Spirit come in, which Spirit does come in. But the truth is, there's nothing that happened. So yes, Spirit will answer me, but it's the kind of thing that I hear a lot from Spirit is just let it all go. Because, I have the habit of, just feeding the idea. And that is the problem, right? So, yet if I am defenseless in my response, which does not mean I cannot set firm rules and limits, I am saying that your seeming attack on me had no effect. Once you say that to somebody, you're healed. You're healed because you realize you're taking responsibility. At this point, I reflect God's response to our seeming attacks. His was a non-responsive defenselessness. Nothing happened. Now, that's an interesting thing. What is it, about 18, 19 years ago, I found the course it was probably like 18 years ago. And I was afraid of it. I mean, just look at those lessons. So I went on to Google and I found Liz Cronkite. So when she first met me, I was talking a lot of my story. And maybe like a couple weeks later, out came a thing when she'd say, "What do you think forgiveness is?" And I hadn't read the book yet. I haven't done any of that yet. So a voice of Sharon came in and said nothing ever happened with, and then I had a fear thing. Who said that? So my ego was already moving out of the way. And I'm quite sure that feeding it does keep it in place. At the same time, feeding it looks like I'm not growing, but the way spirit has worked through me has been kind of like an organized way of undoing from the crown chakra all the way down to the root. So, and I'm going to also teach a little bit about the chakras, but not this week. I have been spending time with Karun Zuko, and it's been absolutely glorious. She's kind. She's as sweet as she can be. And the gentleness, I mean, I will say like all of the 10 characteristics she has. So she's teaching a lot about the chakras, and all the chakras and what they mean. And for me, I needed that. But it's not necessarily anybody else's path, because really, if you just do it the way the course says and it's your guidance, that it will undo anyway. It will undo anyway. But spirit brings different things in for this mind to help me, because behind this, as an ego, there's shame. What if I don't get it? What if I won't ever fit in? Look at these people. They probably got all A's and B's. I had to go to summer school every year, yada, yada, yada. So when I said nothing happened to Liz, I went, "Who said that?" with a very fearful voice. And she said, "Oh, Sharon, you keep going because you're highly evolved to say that." So there was always these beliefs in the mind. Of course, Sharon being highly evolved is irrelevant, but it's that the ego is breaking open. It's just breaking open. So the contrast with the biblical God is highly instructive here, for he becomes quite defensive, protecting his territory by saying to us, "I am God, and don't you dare talk to me that way." Look at Job. He is a perfect example, losing absolutely everything he valued, of what will happen if you rebel against my authority. We are all parents in the image of a biblical God. Carl Jung did make the archetypes, and it's a very profound thing to have. I don't really know like the archetype that I am yet, because I didn't, somebody had sent me a book on it and I just never even opened it, but I'm quite sure it has a lot of the things in it that everyone else has, because there's just one ego. It just acts out differently for all of us. Authority is, there's only one authority, and that is the Christ, right? We are all parents in the image of the biblical God. The letter to the Hebrews states that it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And that's something that's in this mind, or else I wouldn't be even on here. I'd be totally, healed. And that's not true. I have a lot to do yet. We know that this is true because the living God is sometimes loving, sometimes wrathful. So now he's talking about the biblical one, especially in the Old Testament. It was almost like I wouldn't even read it, because like if he's already angry with me, then I don't even want him. The same is true with parents. In fact, as children, we all experienced our parents as loving and good some days, and quite the opposite on the others. And that is true. So anyway, that is also students' experience with teachers and patients with therapists. Everyone in our world has good and bad days. However, our goal is still to reflect the true God's response, to meet attack with attack, and then to forgive ourselves when we become egos too, and find ourselves back in the sandbox throwing sand around. as parents, we are bigger kids than our kids. And so we'll seem to win. Unfortunately, in the sandbox, everybody loses because we're all in fear. So anything that I did as a mom is so meaningless, not to my children, because they're not on this path, but when we get to the place that we realize everything that happened here not only happened for me, but none of it means anything. This character doesn't mean anything. This is good. I'm hitting on a different section that will actually help me teach myself to get this depth of me blaming everybody is what Ken's doing to help this mind. Now, I've read this over and over, but until I've had the shifts that I've had, I couldn't lie to anyone outer picture because it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. Like to want to be liked by Course, in Miracles, Mighty Companions, is just another way the ego gets in there. If someone doesn't like me, they're only looking at their own thoughts about themselves, right? But today's lesson is a really good one because I only see the past. And I'm going to look at that right now because that's all we're doing all the time. I mean, when I get mad at people, it's from the past. It's somebody who I think might be putting me down or teaching me something when in fact, the character that I played was always corrected and challenged and was just afraid, So it's like what Bill Bedford had said, when he woke up, he said, this is my Independence Day. And what I'm getting now is more independence. But, sometimes this ego would hear awakening as something of an accomplishment. Well, it's not. It's happening all organically. So am I saying that I didn't need to do A Course in Miracles? Well, yes and no. Yes, because it mitigates the guilt. But no, because there are people that I know that have had almost their whole character fall away just on its own. And they just did meditation. So that is why everything, it's not personal, it's impersonal. And the only, choice is a weird word because the choice in every moment is who am I listening to? But sometimes the anger comes through and I can't be angry at anyone out there. I'm angry at myself for not accepting love. That's the way it is. So anyway, Lesson 7 is essentially a summary of the previous 6 lessons, as we see in the first paragraph where they're repeated almost verbatim. Okay, so what he's saying is, yesterday's lesson, Ken calls it a bombshell, because we're not seeing people, we're seeing images, we're seeing thoughts, and we're seeing our own beliefs. So he's saying, basically, the reason that nothing means anything, that we have given everything the meaning it has, is that we are only seeing the past. So if we see the past, we're looking at our own ideas. And that's what happened, I think, whenever I've gotten angry with anybody in a group. And I was only seeing my past and my past relationships. So if somebody, I think, thinks they're a know-it-all, I would be seeing my mother. If somebody doesn't have any empathy, I would be seeing my father. If somebody is correcting me all the time, I would be seeing it as a teacher. But I'm projecting the whole shit show. This is what I wanted. This gave me a very good way to get through life by just projecting and projecting and projecting. Kind of what I did with Lynn, actually, which I'm sorry about because I wanted to be right and I wanted support. Basically, it brought me back to a place where, once again, I'm in a classroom and the kids all raise their hand and I can't. And then they call on me and I don't know the answer. These things that come up are for me, but it's kind of, to an ego, it's scary to get in groups where people are getting it and you're not, because this isn't just school. This isn't graduate school. This is what's going to happen to me and my relationship with God. which I see is terribly fearful when you're raised in religion, right? Now, the love, the essence that I have now, all through this process, has come to this mind, and I realize there's only light here. It's not like any of us, what does Keith call solipsism, where you just think, I'm awake and they don't even know what they're doing. Well, you're not awake because there's never been a you. So, it's just funny, So, if I'm only seeing the past, what am I seeing? I'm seeing pictures of the mind from the past. It's interesting. Last night I went on to Leon Russell. I love him. I just love his voice. I love the way he talks to people. I'm quick to love someone, but I can pick up energy on how good the other person is. Because when I am judged in any way, if I'm in my ego, I believe I'm getting hurt. When in fact, that very judgment is my judgment if I buy into it, right? So, keeping in mind the equation of sin, guilt, and fear. And so Karen Perante was was with Leon Russell, and he's interviewing her. And I would really suggest everybody look at that because it was phenomenal. Karen had the most fabulous, sincere talk with Leon Russell. Also, Hakeem has also interviewed Karen. So the interviewing, you get to see how much people put themselves down saying, I'm not getting this, or I have pain, or I have this, when in fact they're talking with their right mind and they already get it. But the way the thought systems work is you can only be in one at a time. So if I'm already like watching politics, I'm going to come out with a higher information about how I feel, how and the judgment and all of it. What's happened for me is I pretty much don't want to watch it anymore because it is insane. I mean, it's just as insane as I am. And if I get in there and no, I don't like the president-elect. I'll never like him. He's everything that I think I wouldn't want for this country. He's a man that he's playing his part, and he's a very hurt child. And when I look at it from that, when I look at it from that belief in me, he's as wounded as I was as a child. I just had a different way of expressing it. I expressed it by pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down. So, because the worst thing that could happen to this character is if someone's mad at her, because that would mean abandonment from God. It's always about God. It's always about love. And really, awakening is so personal. But we're doing this all the time when we are willing. Now, willingness is something that comes from the right mind. However, if the readiness isn't there, then you can feel the way you feel and you have to take responsibility. But that in no time, because there is no time here. This is all timeless energy. But with the way I had it in Gather, I had no clue. I just knew that my grandmother told me this was a dream, but I had all the baggage of believing how bad I was, that I lost everything, that I had divorced, child on drugs, and I was just feeling sorry for myself. But that was even good, because I want to say this: the 12 steps makes you take responsibility too. Those 12 steps bring you to handing everything over to the infinite. And so these things have saved this mind. And I do feel very grateful to the character I played, that the willingness was always there to go for help. I had a very big fear of being crazy. And that was just what the ego picked for me. But bottom line is, I am crazy if I'm in the ego, right? So he's saying basically, whenever we are upset, it's because we are equating something that just happened with something that happened in the past. And that's what I brought up this morning. Now, I hadn't read the course really when I met, when I came into Pal Talk. But Regina was reading, it was like 2009, she was reading a lot of her messages, and the messages were the same messages that Ken's pretty much getting saying. So, when she would say, I'm not seeing anything but my own thoughts, the mind of Sharon was always like, how does that work? And I would understand it, and then it would just completely collapse. So I just had to be authentic through this process. And a lot of times I think I could piss people off because I talk about the illusion, and everybody knows that the illusion's not real. It's not our reality. It's just a story. And there's only me as a small me and a big me, because all of the people are just shadows of my mind. So he's saying here, Ken, this is an authority, and so my hate is justified. This is my rival, and so I have to hate this person. This one is a certain color, which I must hate. Hate is always based on the past. How could you hate anyone if you're just here right now? You can't. So this is a very good lesson, and to spend time in these lessons is imperative, because these are the first 50 lessons. The mind training undoes the crazy mind, the complete insane mind, So I'm going to come back to Ken's book and say, when I heard Ken say we're afraid of love, I was like, no, I'm very loving. This is not, we have no idea what love is from God. The love that I had, I shouldn't say we, was always conditional. Even with my children, if they screamed at me or were disappointed in me or did things that I didn't agree with, there you go. It's the same thing. So the love here is conditional, where the love of God is important for me to say. I really don't know what it would feel like. Now, it's funny because I've known Liz for many, many years, Liz Cronkite, and she had a revelation where she felt this love and she disappeared. I had also a disappearance in this process, because we are never people. But what she did say is, this love is so terrifying to the ego that the ego came back with terror. And that's what it does. So it's a game that we're playing with ourselves, because the ego is just talking to itself. That's what it's doing all day long. He's saying here, I do this. He said, the ancient mariner telling and retelling the story of albatross. That's what I did. Always repeating, always repeating, always repeating, until it's like, until it's like to a place where I ate too many sweets and I want to throw up, right? What I say now is, when I lived in Philly before I left for Altoona, I don't know how people could stand me. I was such a victim, and I relished in it, but it wasn't enough, because readiness didn't come in from spirit until like 2021. And it's gradually shifting into just the present moment, right? Because that's all that's here. So, Ken is saying that I need to basically see the emotional mileage I get from telling my story. And it's like a different energy. It's like when you watch a movie that the guy was so bad and you relish in it. Because that too is an interpretation that I'm looking at and saying, I could never do that. I'm a better person. And that does give the ego, kind of like a way, an albatross, to just own that the fact I'm a victim and everybody hates me, that kind of thing. So the albatross is a white bird symbolizing innocence, and you are accusing yourself of killing innocence. An evil child who destroyed the innocence of his parents. How can you accept love when you are forever condemned? You need to see the emotional mileage that you are getting out of your past, and then say, I can let this go right now. That is the work to do. That is the work. So Sedona method is good. But I'm going to say this. when you have seasoned students and they want you to do what they're doing, it doesn't necessarily help the person unless you understand that we are all in different places on the ladder, right? So I think it's all perfectly well, but the readiness must be there. So anyway, Ken is saying exactly what Rafi says. I can let it go now. The problem is not the way I was as a child, but that I'm afraid of love in the present. And that's all we're doing all day long. It's the fear of love. The fear does not make me sinful, but it does make me very unhappy. Allowing yourself to experience this unhappiness that retelling the story to yourself brings will lead much more quickly to the time when you can let it go. Again, you fear love now, and you're using the sins of your past as the reason. The value of this as a defense is that you cannot change what you did as a child, right? And if the cause of your current problem cannot be undone, and in I can't say it. You just become addicted. It's no different than heroin all day long. So he's saying here, hopelessness should be a red flag that alerts you that this ego is speaking. It does not want you to see that you can change all this now. Your fear of love can be undone the instant you choose to let it go. Now, who's choosing it? Look, even the decision maker is not real, because A Course in Miracles is a story, but we use the decision maker as a way of guiding us towards the right mind, even though the right mind's always here. It's never left. It's just alive now. So how does one let go of their stories of abuse or anything? He's saying not holding parents responsible for problems, successes, or self-image. So then a questioner said to Ken, you have been talking about how you cannot blame your parents for your problems. It occurred to me that the converse is also true. I cannot give credit for my successes to my parents either. You hear that kind of story a lot. I'm a successful businessman because my father was. And that's what we do. Or I do. I say we. This brings back the memory of Lenny Rose. He would always say, Sharon, say I. It's an I statement. It's not we. Anyway, is the answer that Ken gives. It is certainly true that if your father were an excellent businessman and taught you well, you could grow up to become a successful businessman yourself. The problem is this is not the goal in this course. Your whole orientation shifts, because what's your function? Your function is to see what you're believing, to watch your mind, right? Your function is like, you're already awake. And that's also like a misnomer. Like when I went to, I listened to Helen Hamilton and Regina for years, especially when I was in trauma with my son, because the right mind could hear them, but yet the wrong mind was still holding on. It's what Dick Schwartz in, it's called IFS does. He says you have protector parts that doesn't want to let go unless you're gentle. Because some of the things that I have held down into myself, there's fear of letting it go. But what Dick Schwartz is doing, he's bringing you characters. He's bringing you parts therapy, which is just parts of the psyche, because that's all that matters here. If you have a good psychological makeup, the course could go faster. But if you've been bruised, hindered, or whatever it might be, or the time isn't set, because the time is set when you are, readiness comes in. So the understanding for me is always meet people where they are. Because to me, going to God is probably the most fearful thing. So if you're with a teacher that's always talking about awakening, when in fact you're already awake, I got confused. I have to read somewhere. I have to be like Michael Langford, which actually cracks me up. But it's not that every one of the beings that I projected in my dream didn't help me. They helped me in different ways at different times. And the ego mind wanted to make a story up about how I felt with this perception. So I wouldn't see that these thoughts that I'm talking about are all my thoughts. Like, for instance, if I believe a teacher knows more than me, then I'm not believing that I'm equal. And with I don't think I'm equal to another son of God, then that's a problem. So in the teaching student matter, there's no teacher that's ever taught this mind. It's all coming from within me. No teacher, I've called that teacher in as a figure in my dream to help me. And if they piss me off, then I'm projecting on my fear of me, of God, of everything. So there's no anger anymore, but there is like confirmation that when I'm feeling uncomfortable and I can't tell someone, the ego builds up. And then it's like, okay, this is getting stupid. This is reminding me of when I was a child, right? And that's a good thing, because I buried everything. I was the good girl from my parents. I didn't get in trouble. I listened to what they did. And my older sister was screaming and yelling at them while I'd be crying when they were going through their early 20s and they were in trauma from polio. But I do believe that my mom and dad had mental illness. Now, do I think it was pathological? I think to a point. But I also know that everyone on this planet that thinks they're a person is mentally ill. So either way, you're really okay. Anyway, Ken is saying about the businessman, he's saying, if you had a father who was successful and taught you well, you could grow up becoming a successful businessman yourself. Now, this is kind of like Donald Trump. His father didn't care about anyone but himself. His father wanted to be the richest person in New York, right? And he wanted him to follow in his footsteps. These are the kinds of things that traumatize a child. How can you become a really whole, happy person when your father wants you to beat somebody out of, like, get the only A in the class or have the most money? So there's always an understanding of compassion for whoever is hurting, right? Now, we know what true compassion is, but I do that in the silence. But compassion as an ego is to meet people exactly where they are, right? So he's saying, Ken, to this questioner, the problem is that this is not the goal. In this course, your whole orientation shifts. The goal is not that you be successful in the world's terms, but that you remember who you are as a child of God. Now, we're all children of God. Like, everybody, in my opinion, are on a spiritual path, whether they know it or they're not. They just haven't been called to maybe this teaching, but everyone, because we're not people. So we're either with the ego, and like for Donald Trump, he probably has more ego. That's all. Darker egos, beliefs, and especially like if, from what I understand, his father was pathological narcissist. Now, I couldn't say that about the way I was brought up, because there was always goodness in my house, even when they were crazy. My mother always wanted people to be fairly treated. My father was always a Democrat. He wanted everybody to have equal. But that doesn't mean that they were perfect, because they were egos. But Donald Trump had a father that only wanted him to be successful. That's a tall order in this world. And so then he went down into being a crook. And I think that my ex-husband was like that. Now, I'm talking about them, and these are thoughts, and it's a story, but can I identify with this? Yeah, in different ways I can, because we're all traumatized from just being here. It's so important to remember who you are at all times, but the remembering comes in from spirit. The remembering is spirit, remembering its true self. So we have this decision maker. And like I said earlier, the decision maker is also illusory, but it's a guidepost. It's like when you get geometry or math or anything, you have guidance into how to do these problems and solve them. The decision maker is the absolutely part of our minds that can go to the right or the wrong mind. He's also saying here that what's true for our self-image, parents are not responsible for our positive or negative views of ourselves. They serve only to reinforce decisions we have already made. And believe it or not, if we, I have, the book, about the soul, and we picked everything. It's not personal consciousness, it's impersonal consciousness. However, I do feel that before we come in, our story is already made by our beliefs. That's all that it could be doing. A memory keeps coming back. This is a question or to an experience I had when I was 4. I was going to run away from home. I had all my worldly goods and my blanket and was about to walk out the door when my father walked in from work. He knelt in front of me and asked where I was going. I remember being very mad. I must have gotten in trouble with my mom. I told him I was running away from home, and he said, well, supper's ready, so why don't you stay and have supper? And then if you still want to run away, you can. He was definitely very loving. I stayed for supper and, of course, did not run away. I cannot seem to make any connections with that because there were a lot of times when my father spanked or yelled at me. The word that keeps coming up for me is approval. So this is Ken answering. One thing that stands out in your story is comparison between your mother and father. Well, we all know that, the ego is built on comparisons because comparison is judgment. And that's how it operates. I like that teacher, but I don't like that one. She's nice and she isn't. And when we see that, or I see that in my consciousness, quickly shift to the right mind, quickly. And if not quickly, then when the readiness comes. So anyway, eventually your mother was upset with you and you were going to run away from her. Now, here's what happened to me when I see my past. I favored my father. And that's just the way the story unfolded. And my older sister favored my mother. And each one of both my parents took a role in beating our psyches down. But since they weren't here physically and they were just a projection, it was all me that was doing that. So my mother did get upset with me because my father was doing a lot of things that were not okay. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that till years later. He had an affair. He probably had a lot of affairs. But he was nice to this person because I really got an A+ in people pleasing, and he liked that. He did like that. So in any case, what Ken is saying to this guy about the fact that, he picked and compared his parents, he's saying, your father came in his loving response to you without confronting you with an issue, helped you change your mind. That memory has within, it is not only that no one else loved or approved you the way, but that your child loved you and your mother did not. And that was me. That's just a story that I always told. My sister, the oldest, she doesn't really talk to myself and my younger sisters because when my dad died, she went through, she never recovered from her beliefs. So she doesn't want to bother with us because she wants to be done with the Baker family. But I still write her I wrote her on New Year's because even as a child, I knew that she had a harder time than me with her emotions. I could keep them down, but this is all coming from our ego mind, which sets it up to have a good parent and a bad parent, right? Most of the work I've done, this is another one questioning, around my dad. And I am in a very loving and forgiving place with him. But when it comes to my mom, it's getting harder and harder to be with her. So now Ken is answering. This memory explains why. She has always been the bad one, and your father, even if he disciplined you, had a real sense of love. You played all one off against the other, the good from the bad parent. This memory holds the germ of that theme, and it probably is time for you to forgive her and complete the symphony, because that's all we're doing. We are playing a symphony, a beautiful symphony of a life that basically is being lived by the ego until spirit comes in and takes us into peace. So I next week will read wanting unconditional love from your mother. That's definitely for me. So the point is that everybody is doing the best, and we are all playing our part, and we are all walking each other home. And you cannot make a mistake in this process. Thank God. Anyway, I'm going to stop. And Lynn and I are now going to read. And whoever wants to join us, Bill Thetford's book. Now, I listen to that book a lot during the day because it's profound to me. Absence of Felicity, I wish he had it on tape because I tend to need both because of the way my neurology works. I need to hear it and read it. And for me right now, I am in the present moment, and I'm seeing that there really is nothing here but objects, including this mind.